right, we are now in the April 13th unit, which is unit 12, and this is just bouncing back and forth between Photoshop and Illustrator. So as we know, we always are going to find at the beginning stages we have what I'm going to put in air quotes as our favorite. So our favorite is Photoshop or Illustrator or what have you. So this is going to be the time to sort of get used to bouncing between the two, because Photoshop, Illustrator, and then ultimately InDesign are all going to sort of meld together. Each one's going to have their own, area of expertise, so to speak. So for the Photoshop, we know what the words there, our photos, our imagery, effects that are going to be on, images are going to be best within Photoshop. Some people like to do the sort of special effects in the type. There are lots of tutorials out there for that. Sure, go for it. Illustrator, great for the layout, great for the type. You're going to have nice and clear. Excluding, let's say, Photoshop with the, Photoshop with the special, like, let's say it's like Beethoven and it's some sort of weird cosmic looking type effect. That's fine. I would consider that a-okay. But other than that, type I do want to see done in Illustrator. So that way you get used to having nice, clear type. Type in Photoshop is going to look really pixelated and bitmapped, so do try to avoid that unless, like we just said, it's for the special effect. So I'm going to put the lecture here. Once we're done, we're doing it right now. So we're just going to do a combo. So what we're going to do is a poster for what is called the Mostly Mozart Music Festival. This is going to be 11 by 17, and this is vertical only. Here's why. So when you go to, say, the Maryland Theater or I think there's a theater in downtown Frederick too, they have those marquees, or even just a movie theater. All of our movie posters, if you're walking into the theater, they're all vertical and they're all the same size. So we're going to be following that as our preset. So if it has to fit within, the poster marquee area, it can only be vertical. I'm going to recommend, your layout text is probably going to be an Illustrator. Photoshop is probably going to be for the manipulation of your imagery, but bring it all together. And I am going to recommend, for the most part, since our type is going to be doing last, try it doing that part in Illustrator. Here is the type to include. So all of that needs to be there. I don't have a sense of hierarchy or organization or structure, because that is your job to figure out. What is the header? What is the most important part? What's the title? The website, is that important? That's probably at the bottom, not quite so big. So you get the idea. You're going to figure out where our emphasis points are in this. So rearrange that type in an order that makes sense to you, but all of that text needs to be included. And you can use a grid system if you so wish to arrange your elements. I'm going to talk about grids more in Design 2 for those of you who are going there, but I do want to talk about it here also, and we'll just use our default grids. And this is going to be due on April 27th. So gonna go look at this type. So it's the Beyond Beethoven. All right. So it's, Discover Beethoven. It's beyond the Fifth Symphony. So I could decide, if it's mostly Mozart festival, is Mozart going to be the imagery? Is it going to be music? Is it some kind of crazy background? Is it going to be Beethoven? Lots and lots of imagery decisions to think about. Also, imagery might not even be a part of it. You could just do purely typographic. You can handwrite your type and scan it in with your camera. Just use your camera if you do that. And then you can, have like a headline like mostly, and you just script it out or what have you. So that would count as an image, but there's nothing that says you have to have a person's face. So for something like this, that is going to be, let's say, Mozart or Beethoven. Beethoven. Let's just pick on him. And let's go ahead and look at the images. So this is one of those weird things, like let's say we were in Pexels and we type in Beethoven. Also, this is what's probably going to happen. Uh-oh, we couldn't find anything for Beethoven. But you can see it's telling you, do you want piano or music? So hey, yeah, maybe a piano. That's a great idea. Adobe stock, they're like, hey, you can buy some. And I'm like, no, I don't quite want to buy some. So let's look at piano. All right, there might be some good images there, and I hadn't thought of that, so maybe we do want to consider that. But if I'm just, absolutely hell-bent on I have to have Beethoven, go to your tools. So all of these, everything just sort of lumped together. And that is bad, because we want tools usage right, we need to be able to use this. So it's labeled for reuse. You see they have other ones here also. So right now it's saying there is no license filtering. This is where Google gets people in trouble, because if you use anything, it can be copywritten. So don't do that. So let's say we want this one. This is the right one. So let's label it for the reuse. And this is why our friend Wiki is sort of nice, because Wiki is an encyclopedia. So chances are encyclopedias are typically historically known for being able to, of course, reuse their info. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's click on that. Let's see what's going on here. All right, so you can see this one was $4.98 by $5.99. That's not that big. So what I'm going to recommend whenever you do images like this, go for something that's in the thousands. So 1,000 by 1,000 is going to be, at least in this case, the best resolution possible. And you will probably panic and say, that's not big. Well, that's because when you hover over it, you're going to see no magnifying glass, magnifying glass. Click on it. It's going to give you the little bit larger one. Typically, it gets really, really big, so that's concerning. So let's just click on the original file and make sure. All right, maybe it's giving us a preview. That sort of makes me a little paranoid. Some of these can be really massive. If you look up the Mona Lisa, it's huge. Well, let's go ahead and drag that into Photoshop. All right, so, you know, we could keep it as is. You could use like maybe just the hands, maybe just the head. I don't know. Something that you can play around with, which we haven't really touched on. Oops, that was too many. Zoom out. One more. There we go. I want to be able to see all of it. Is some special effects. So I'm going to take the slant that I want this to be sort of for a younger set to get them introduced to classical music. So this is kind of boring. What more could I do to it? So filters in Photoshop are sort of one of those things. You do one and everyone can smell them an absolute mile away. So try to do a series of them if you're going to use them, and or use your layer styles in conjunction with that. So step one, I'm going to duplicate that layer because I don't want anything to happen to that original. So I'm going to call this one lime because I have lime already up. So lime layer. And I'm sort of lazy today, so I don't feel like redoing my swatch for now. So whenever I go into our filters, you're going to want to go to Filter Gallery. Now, if Filter Gallery and some of these are grayed out, this is one of those reasons why I said do your CMYK conversion at the end, because you can't use some of these things in CMYK. So right now, I'm still in RGB, so it's going to work fine. So whenever this pops up, and you can tell which one I use a lot, I like the halftone patterns, so we're going to stay there for a little bit. And the traditional halftone pattern looks like, oops, not that, the dot, looks like the newspapers. So this is actually how once upon a time newspaper imagery was built, with this like dot matrix concept. So you can see there's the collapse and expand, so weird artistic ones. The brush strokes, maybe I want accented edges. Maybe I want to distort it with a diffused glow or glass or bas relief, whatever. This is the area I don't really delve too far into. I just want you to sort of experiment on your own. Something I'm not liking is that we're going to lose maybe some of that face, so I might want to switch my, I'm just going to talk about this. For the sort of sketchy effects, it's going to take your foreground and your background. So whenever you have it, like, I'm not sure how that's going to work with his face, but we'll find out. But if you're not digging it, maybe switch up your colors a little bit. So that's why the lime is showing up, because that's what I had there. You can make it smaller. You can make it larger. You can give it more contrast. You can give it less contrast. Actually, I think for this one, less is going to be best. I'm going to make it a little bit bigger of our dot, and I'm going to go ahead and hit OK. So we could use this as our base layer, or we could play around with our layer styles. That's what I was going to be concerned about, because it makes this weird effect there. So lighten screen. Some of these could be interesting. Ooh, color dodge. That one would look kind of interesting. So you can start, you know, building up different effects from there. I'm going to duplicate our background layer again. I'm going to pull it to the top, and now let's make magenta. Why not? And this time around, I'm going to make it more pinkish, just to see. That might not be a good contrast. Let's make it more light blue. That way we get a little bit of a contrast shift. And you guessed it, we're going to go back into our filter gallery because we want to see what we can sort of do with this. So, you know, maybe that's kind of nice. The photocopy look, I don't know. This is just purely experiment. This is where you're going to probably lose a lot of time. Sometimes what I like to do is, which is what you saw in the early on, is I had it in the line because then I like the line and the dots to sort of commingle. So let's go with that because that's my usual go-to. Well, you're like, that's great. I can't do anything. Well, you guessed it. We go back into our layer styles and you can see how these effects are going to sort of talk to the layer below it. And for this, you have to kind of go one by one by one, and you can use your up and down arrow until you find one you like. That actually pin light's kind of interesting for where I want to go with it. Those are a little too extreme. Luminosity is kind of interesting. It looks kind of like a dollar bill. So this is just, I'm gonna go with pin light because it's just something slightly different. But you can see how some of the greens are coming through, and then we have this, you know, talking to it. So all of the layers are sort of chit-chatting with each other. So one thing is we know our size has to be 11 by 17. So let's go ahead and, I'm actually just going to go ahead and make an 11 by 17, 11 wide, 17. We want it to be portrait. We want it to be 300. For now, let's ignore it and leave it on RGB. All right, I'm going to, actually, let's save it. Beethoven imagery backer. That way I can find it quickly. I'm just going to put it on my desktop for now. I'll find its home later. And then what I'm going to do is do another save as, and I'm going to flatten it. So I'm going to put the word flat so I can find it. What I'm going to do is go to this drop down menu and just flatten that image. Copy it. By selecting all, I copy it, and I'm going to paste into this one. So that image was a little bit smaller. I'm going to hold down my option key so it grows out. I'm going to do that again because I have my shift set up like it used to be, but you guys won't. You can just hold down your option key. Keep those proportions normal. Here's why I'm putting it on 11 by 17, because we know it's not an 11 by 17 proportion. So we need a little like upper or lower. So we need to decide, you know, do we want him to be more towards the top? Do we want a band? Do we want him more towards the bottom and our info here? Do we want him more like on a rule of thirds? I'm going to, on my background, I'm going to change it to magenta, and I'm going to, you might see gradient instead, but I always have my paint bucket up, so let's see what magenta looks like. I mean, that's kind of interesting. It's already working with that pink. Let's try the green. No, I'm feeling more like this one. And this one is kind of getting there. What I want to do is add a layer on top, go to our gradient, and I want it to be, well, one, I want it to be in the magenta. So that way we have our magenta. Go back to our gradient, and I want it to go foreground. Okay, let's switch it. It's going to be grumpy. There we go. So we want it to be the pink to the none. So mine's going to pop up the none. None looks like little checkerboards. So if you're not seeing it, you're like, why are there checkers? So the checker's saying it's going to be transparent when I'm done. So I want to create a feather, and I want to create a feather, maybe. I kind of like what's happening up there, but I do want a feather here on the bottom for sure. And I'm going to put it right up to this line so it looks like it sort of fades into it. So then, you know, the info for the theater can go here and the website. I'm feeling all right with this. So I'm going to call this one Poster Backer. And I think I'm also going to save it as a JPEG just in case that PSD file is a little bit too big. Since it is a rather large file, the JPEG will speed up the load time and the work time. All right, so Poster Backer, Beethoven. Okay, and I'm going to leave him up just so we can see it for the next stage. And let's go into Illustrator. And we're going to create that 11 by 17. 11, width, height, 17. Make sure it's going this way. One artboard is sufficient. All right. And go ahead and go to File, Place, and you're going to find Poster Backer, and I'll just use the JPEG just to make it a little speedier and demo. And you can see the colors have shifted just a little bit because I've made a print document, and then I actually had forgotten to convert it to CMYK. So your last stage should be convert to CMYK, and then you won't have that problem. So now we brought something in from Photoshop, and then we're going to take it into Illustrator. So if you're working oppositely, so let's say we were going to do our text, and it was beyond, no, mostly Mozart, sorry, mostly Mozart, and that was going to be beyond. And I'm just going to choose anything because it doesn't matter for a demo. Apparently it does. Guess what I like to work with in type? All right, I'm just going to pick, Century might be nice. I'm going to go with more of a modern look. And maybe for mine, let's just make it white so it stands out. All right, and I'm going to duplicate it, hold down that Option key, Mozart. Oops. I'm going to make this one a bold. Hopefully this one has it. It does. All right, that way we have some contrast. Make it a little bit bigger. Whereas a little bit bigger, I mean a lot bigger. And maybe, you know, do I want it there? Do I want it to flow in here? Do I want it linked in? That might be nice. So sometimes what I'll do is just duplicate it on the artboard and make a couple of them so I can sort of see the flow of it. All right, that's all right. Do I want it before? That might be nice because we'll also have the word festival in there somewhere. Mostly Mozart Festival. All of these will look all right. So this is that fiddly stage, so you can keep going if you want. Festival. Mostly Mozart Festival. And for that one, I'm going to give it a little bit of contrast, and I'm just going to pick one of my standbys, and I will make that white also. And let's go ahead and make it really big. And I'm going to sample this color with my eyedropper, but what I'm going to do is I don't want it completely that. I'm going to take it and I'm going to make it more of a tint. And I'm actually going to push it to the back with Shift Command left bracket because I feel like that could be more interesting. I would play around with these positionings a lot more, just as a heads up. I'm not for demo's sake. All right, let's slide that while my computer blows up over. Bring it to the front. So that contrast is going to need to be boosted just a little bit more. I'm freezing. There we go. Let's make it really light. That's a lot better. I would probably kick it in a little bit more, and then I could start like beyond Beethoven, and then I could put my info here. So this is if I'm going from Photoshop into Illustrator. What if we want to do the opposite? So I'm going to grab the headers and go back into, let's just go into Photoshop again. Okay, yeah, I did flatten it. So I'm going to go back to the poster backer one. All right, so let's say you did all this and you're like, but I want to bring, you know, clearer text in. This one will work, but you won't be able to edit quite the same. I guess you could make it a smart object and then it would, but there are some limitations with this. So let's say I build the text elsewhere. I'm going to click on those, copy it, bring it into, yeah, let's make it a smart object. And that way we can keep editing it. So then you can bring from Illustrator into Photoshop. So this one's going to depend completely in what your work style is. Do you prefer one or the other? The text, looks pretty decent, so you should be able to get away with it. One thing I noticed, this part got a little bit weird. So you might have some adjustments when you bring them in, but it's a pretty accurate, you know, bring in from one to the other. You can bring in, going back into Illustrator, let's say we want a weird pink box with, this is not going to make sense by the way, but I'm going to do it anyway. with a star cut out. Punch that out so that whenever I bring this in, I can copy it and I can paste it. Sure, why not? I need to stop adding that to my library. I don't want these. But maybe for whatever reason, you're like, man, I really want this box down here with the star. And then whenever I make it bigger, you have to hit enter so that you can get it to set. And then all my info is going to go in here. This looks really bad, but that's all right. It's a demo. So you can bring in from one to the other. So let's say we did something crazy. I made a new layer and I'm going to grab my brush and I'm going to take that brush way down. All right, so maybe I'm going to do some weird sort of scribbly doodle like that. I can select the background, I can invert it. So select inverse, so just this part's selected. Copy it, and you guessed it, paste it in to Illustrator. So this is how they all start working together. So you can bounce between one and the other to build your piece. I'm going to say this one's purely experimental. So I want to see you and what you can do between the two. So do some things in Photoshop, do some things in Illustrator, and then bring them in together into one of the programs. Now, that being said, if you're having issues getting Photoshop, Illustrator, and all those to work, you're going to be using Canva or you're going to be using Spark. These are our options for now as our backup. So the other option is just go into Spark. And then whenever you're in there, they might not have a tabloid size. I think they do. But if they don't, letter is fine. Let's go ahead and get started. And I'm not going to demo Canva. Please stop. You can go ahead and you can see boop-a-doop-a-doop, all of these options and custom size. That's exactly what you want. Let's change it to inches. You want it 11, you want it by 17, and then you're going to go ahead and hit next. And then you're going to be able to build your pieces from there. I mean, you can still put your Beethoven that we found. So, you know, you can bring in your imagery. Now mine's going to be slow because I have all my screen captures in. You can have your text. You can have, you know, templates pre-made, and maybe you'll put something like this, and then you'll have your design in there. You can still do this project without using Photoshop or Illustrator. So you do have an option for those of you who don't have that working yet. You're just going to be using Spark or Canva. Otherwise, if you have it working, remember, this is just the semester of experimentation. See what the two do together. And I can't wait to see what you create. Have fun, explore, and experiment. I will talk to you later.